Welcome everyone to today's meetup. Today we are hoping to answer the question, what is your vibe around coding? Matt is going to be leading today's discussion and he is joined by a panel of speakers.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. As usual, we are talking about the evolution of the software developer. It's amazing because we've been running this business for 3 years almost, and more recently than ever, clients are going, can you come and teach us how to use AI tools to develop faster and build quicker? One of the quite frequent guests on this and a client of ours who's quite far down the road in their ecosystem journey, I asked him, what are you doing in the AI space? And he's like, well, I don't get any more budget. So I can't get any more people. So I have to make a plan. And we're doing a whole lot of cool stuff using AI tools. And we've just reconfigured ourselves so we can deliver more work with less people. And our conversation is very much going to be around that. And I've brought in such a great panel. Obviously, I don't want to take anything away from Jay. You get to see him a lot, but he is the CEO and founder of Ecosystem AI. And recently, a new addition to the ecosystem family is Ecosystem Code, very much in line with what we're going to be discussing today. So welcome, Jay. We've got Yash. Actually, Yash and Jeff are both ex-colleagues of mine, so I brought all my friends to the party. Yash and I worked together at ThoughtWorks. Yash used to take a lot of money from me at the pool table because he never told me he's a professional snooker player, and he still does that. He lives in Mauritius now, and he's playing on that level again, which is super cool. But when he's not playing pool, Yash is like the Uber management consultant. I think his CV says Accenture, McKinsey, BCG, Bain. I mean, you name it, the top consultancies. And then obviously then ThoughtWorks is right up there. And we had some blood, sweat and tears at the big blue bank together. And I think it's those sort of things that help you grow. And we've got opportunity to partner on some really cool stuff. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Matt.
He'll tell you he used to code. And he's also built a phenomenal platform that he's busy getting seed funding for called Ghostwriter. Is that right? And so I think it'll be great to get his view of this very topic. Then Jeff and I worked together at Guardrails. We spent a lot of time in the client space. I watched Jeff grow up from senior right into solutions architect, and then my sales sidekick, convincing clients to take us on to build really amazing products and platforms for them. Jeff is a phenomenal engineer, and it's not just at work. He's automated his whole house. But thanks for joining us, Jeff. I would call you a traditional software developer in this context, but what is that anymore? Awesome. Let's jump straight in. Welcome to the audience. I see a lot of familiar faces and one or two new ones. So thanks for joining us. I love it when you chime in. We've managed to get us on a platform that the weird, dodgy guys don't chime in and put funny pictures. So it'll be genuine, good conversation and not some weirdos with some weird videos. I think, as Madison mentioned, if you want to chime into a specific topic or conversation, put your hand up, pop something into the chat, and we'll jump on it. Okay, we're talking about vibe coding. And when I do talk to clients and I talk about vibe coding, they say, don't call it that. Vibe coding is something that Matt Hindley can do. And we would never have you come and build systems in our world. Let's just go around the table. We're talking about coding using AI tools, then there's vibe coding. Let's get some definitions out the way. What are you calling it and what do you call vibe coding? Do you want to go first and then Jeff and then Jay?
Hi, everybody. So what do I think vibe coding actually is? Look, it's quite nascent at the moment, so we have a lot of those kind of discussions with people as to what it is and what it isn't. It's going to emerge over time, I suspect. I do know a lot of people putting emphasis on the level of understanding of the code, into that definition. So if you've coded it, but you don't actually understand it, or you haven't actually looked at it, they've considered it vibe coding, and it's really used, as you said, it's a kind of a pejorative, if you're being irresponsible and you're not really getting stuck into it. For me personally, in my business, I don't have as negative a view of vibe coding. I think there are many times where I don't really need the understanding of certain parts of the code base that we're working with. I get some benefits of coding without having a full understanding of what's happening with certain areas of the code base. It gives me a speed advantage. It helps me better design some features that I have in mind. And with the time that I do save, it helps me bolster the testing capabilities to test the application. So when I take a look at it more holistically, yes, I do think it's a function of not fully understanding all the parts of it, but I don't think it's necessarily an entirely bad thing. It allows me to better invest my time in other aspects of the application itself. So that's my perspective on what it is and whether it's good or bad.
Awesome. Thanks, Yash. Jeff?
Yeah, I guess in my mind, the crux of what vibe coding is feeling out code or feeling out a solution rather than an analytical approach. I think particularly taking the perspective as an engineer in control theory, I very distinctly remember our lecturer in control theory talking about how one could use a neural network for a controller in an industrial system. And although it allows you to very quickly develop a solution, the problem is you don't really know what's happening inside it. And so how do you provide a guarantee about performance based on that? And I think that really, that vein follows through quite well into the software area. Yeah, I guess there's a pejorative term that makes a lot of sense, particularly when there's things like money, reputation, or maybe even livelihoods and health on the line. I do think we have a responsibility to really understand what's going on. And I think, as Yash has alluded to as well, I think a very central term there is the understanding. So like I said, feeling out a solution rather than understanding it. I think that's very useful for rapidly getting out some kind of prototype or proof of concept. And yeah, definitely has a value.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Jay?
When I think of vibe coding, I think of the flying dodo in Mauritius.
Do tell.
Familiar with that, Yash?
Yes, indeed. We still have a few in hiding over here. So,
Well, the Flying Dodo is a world-renowned brewery in the heart of the city that invite brewers from all over the world to go there and experiment with various kinds of hops and alcohol levels and even additions that you can add to the hops to create certain flavors. And that is vibing beer. So the question is, in our world, can you create something that you can deliver reliably? And we see it as a systems engineering approach. So that means that it's a full stack problem, and 90% of the code, I don't need to read it or know how it works. And that, I think, is the mindset that came through very, very strongly in a lot of the companies we're dealing with in San Francisco. Even if you think of Claude code is written 100% with Claude code. No line of code was touched by Boris since November last year. So that means that the commercial tools that you use today are already being replaced with automated code generation. But I think what's happening is that you need some kind of engineering discipline. And it's a bit like what Yash was saying, is that you don't care by the time it does the job well, because if the outcome is correct and you have been able to generate all of your conditions of tests and the like, then maybe you don't care. Or what you might want to do is you might have to have a deterministic design approach. And that's what we maybe can talk about later, Matt. I think our approach has been, how do you create reliability around taking the things that we know that need to be correct? And we spent probably a year in putting that together. And that means that the rules of the scaffolds and the way in which you build it. So I think that systems engineering using AI tools is what it should be called. Vibe coding is just an arbitrary interim step while we're busy jumping onto the next step. I think maybe, can I give you a little bit of background? So I started in 99,000 Texas Instruments and used to write about 50 pages of code to move the column of a report from one column to the next. So when Aztec C came along that do rummable code, and I could write it in about 3 pages, you know how amazing that was. And then by the time 4GLs came along and you could write it in, 10 lines of code. So that means that maybe I've been in my career through this entire era of writing thousands of lines of code to do something useless. And now what I want to do is just tell it to do it for me, and it must do it. And I can take all what I've learned as the rule, and it must then stick with the rule.
Cool. Let's just throw a question then. Does understanding the code still matter, or is the outcome enough? I think, Jay, you kind of already said the outcome is enough. Jeff, Yash, what do you think? Jeff?
I guess this is very context dependent. I think maybe a really good example in literally the past week, I'm responsible for a calculation engine. Obviously, precision is quite a key concern with that kind of system. But when that integrates to other systems, we do want to be able to test the client system to see how it handles error responses, for example, from that engine. In that case, we're not really too concerned about knowing the deep understanding of this emulator. It's not important to us. We are only interested in results in that case. So I do think there's a very strong component of horses for courses, as the saying goes here. I think what Jay said is quite interesting because I follow a very similar rationale when it comes to looking at the place of AI-generated code. And one thing that resonates quite strongly for me is how we've got progressive layers of encapsulation and increased complexity. I think, being honest, I can't say that I always understand everything down to the base level. That said, there are absolutely times that I've had to actually go in and go all the way down to what's actually happening at a machine instruction level just to make sure I know, okay, this is really doing exactly what I think it's doing. I do think it varies by use case. If you're busy building some kind of relatively low impact application, it's not important. If precision and accuracy is extremely important to you, you might want to take an interest in understanding what it's doing.
Awesome. What's your thoughts on Yash?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So my view is that it is important to understand the code. For me, the code is not simply a means to the end and the output and the experience. It's actually, over the course of time, a living entity, because it's long living in that it's a record of the history of decisions and rules and thinking and growth over multiple years. So it's critically important that when you build something initially, you build it really fast. And then over the next few years, it gets dirty really quickly, right? Whether you're using AI coding, whether you're kind of doing it yourself manually, that still seems to be the natural endpoint of how it goes until you need to rebuild the whole thing. I think that the biggest problem that we have, and I know one of the topics that we're focusing on is in relation to enterprises. Over the years, you have many applications and all of them are aging. All of them have been growing badly. And if we don't actually appreciate what those things are, then we won't take care of them. The biggest thing that we've seen in larger corporates is we go in to do a piece of work and then we rapidly find out everything around it, it's broken. So we always try some new technology or some new method of working, and then after a couple of quarters, executives come out and say this thing has actually failed, it hasn't done what it was supposed to. And we flag the same problems every single time. You have lots of technical debt, you have brittle systems, you don't really understand the rules that you need to use and work with. And I think those three problems are actually a consequence of not valuing the code itself. I hate this phrase when they say IT is just an enabler, as opposed to some kind of consumable like stationery in times gone by. But it's actually really a mirror of the business. And you have to realize that's the goal of your organization. Very often you ask people in the room what the rules are for a particular business process, and they have no idea. But in the code, it's actually there. And sometimes we have to go there just to find out what were those rules, because we don't know where the product specs are. People have resigned or gone, the documents are dated. So that's really the only source of truth you actually have. So yeah, for me, it's very important that everybody understands the code. Not every bit of it, but the ability to understand it and know that the critical parts of it have been coded well is essential. And I think you should apply the same attitude as you would to any other professional. I mean, guys, if you had your accountants come to you and said, I've prepared your financials, I've done some vibe accounting, I have no idea what's actually in there, but here's the doc, you would not be happy with that because you don't have an assurance. You can't trust this. The person's just hit a button and given you an output, right? You're looking for someone you can trust that really knows what they're talking about. And I think we as professionals to our own clients, we have to demonstrate the same level of care and understanding and figuring out how this is going to impact them in the long term.
Awesome. Thanks, Yash. I have seen a question pop up and I actually do want to take
it up.
Yeah, go for it, Jay, if you want to comment on this aspect.
So that means that how many people here have had a conversation with Linus Torvalds about the kernel? Or spoken to the guys from FreeBSD about
emails, which he's ignored several times, but yes.
But if you looked at the kernel on the machine that you run? Have you looked at the code that sits in your word processor to make sure that it works? Have you looked at the code that runs on your pacemaker that's keeping you going right now? If you looked at the code that is in your car driving? So no. So I think that there's a mindset that I found that we had to go through quite a big paradigm shift on. And that is that you blindly rely on companies. Let's an example, take Microsoft. If I look at the internal list, we're on the internal partner list, right? So we can see the known bugs that are critical. So the big number is not big, it's maybe 160,000 or so. So that means that bugs that cannot be fixed that day, 160,000, and you release on the hour. That's why you can't use things like Agile. We don't use Agile, it's too slow. I mean, I've done about 5 releases today. You should put out at least 10, 20 releases per day. So that means that your ability to adapt based on a reliable core means that we at least now got a deep understanding, especially around the code companies who've been able to get this right, including we think we've got some success in that. It means you have to change your practice. You cannot apply the classical, I'm going to design, and then I'm going to think, then design, then code, do it on some 10-day cycle, get some backlog going. I mean, that's not how it works anymore. The entire practice has moved. So maybe we can talk about that a bit later. We've got 7 pillars of a practice now that you have to implement if you want to get it to function in this way, I think. And that means that the scale issue cannot go away. And that then means that what we've been using is a go-to test. Can you reproduce Salesforce core CRM functionality in 1 hour? Can you reproduce Monday.com? Can you reduce SAP core accounting system? Can you replace a general ledger? Can you do a credit process in 1 hour? That's the go-to test that anybody like us who is in that tooling space now are aiming at, and we fairly reliably can regenerate the entire core Salesforce capability with all their data models and make it far more clean in code with no arbitrary integration needed, like using these new tools. But that means that you've got a deterministic style of working. It's not vibing every possible system from scratch. And that's why I think that there's a new way of design that is emerging. And that is a very, very big thing that we had to get our minds around if we want to build tools. So we build all of our demo products, our mobile apps, the online sites, anything that is visual is generated using our own scaffolds. And that means a set of rules and everything that are put in place. So that means that if the productivity is 20-1 or maybe 10-1, you're in the right place. That's kind of the measure that we want to work on. But that means that it took us a long time to get there, to get ready, to then get it done. And I think people don't always want to put in the effort to get ready. They think it's, oh, I can do it quickly. I'm going to do it in this hour. And I'm going to code and code and code and code. And then you have to go check everything. And that's why I agree with you. Then you have to go to the code because you can't trust it. You haven't created the practice of trust as your starting point. So maybe we can talk about that a bit later. That's...
Yeah, I think we should pick that up a bit later because I think that's super interesting. I've got a recruiter that's asked me the question, and it's our recruiter. As many of you know, he's popped up a question, and I know how she's thinking. So, and this is for the panel, and you can all give it a go. How do you think it will change the future of roles? Are we moving to a world where someone will perhaps become a financial services specialist who has engineering as a component to their skill? Or will there still be generalized engineers in 10 years? Or more than likely have a blend of super specialists who understand specific mechanics and those who come to build solutions with broader scope? Jeff?
I think when we're talking about roles, just as a piece of context, in my opinion, I think AI tools for generating code are extremely effective when you've got a very solid foundation. So in other words, what you're generating is the top level of functionality that is connecting things together. And I think within that context, that does allow people to specialize in their area of interest. So basically allow subject matter experts to actually produce functioning software. But I do think that that is still going to be dependent on a solid foundation of people whose specialization itself is in software. I think potentially one of the big dangers at the moment is that obviously we have an entire economy at the moment that produces software developers, or at least has been developing software developers up until a few years ago. So for me, I think one of the interesting implications here is that the role of software developer isn't going to go away. I do believe you will still have people whose speciality is making sure that deep understanding of the code, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do. But when we have other people busy writing this in software who are reliant on that lower level software, where are the people who are going to write that software going to come from? So it's a bit of a tangent, I suppose, on the question, but somewhat related in that, where are we going to find new junior developers when everybody's using AI to write their code? And we do want people to write their own code, but we do need the software developers, the people who understand what's going on.
Yeah. So from my research and understanding, what I've learned is that they've estimated that 30% of the sort of junior intermediate software developers' work is being taken over by AI. So if we don't really need the juniors anymore, which saves organizations a lot of time, senior engineers don't have to do too much over the shoulder teaching and learning. Yes, they'll have to get their own coffee, unfortunately. But then how do we grow engineers? How do we grow engineers up? I mean, I know I've kind of sort of thrown this a little bit sideways, but I mean, there's going to be a real gap if this is the go-to, because we've got a bunch of great senior people that can oversee and look at how we're using these platforms. We don't need the juniors anymore because we're going to use the platforms, but then how do we grow juniors up?
Yeah.
Any one of you can answer that, because
I think that what we've done in our business, we've employed 0 technical people. We've employed people who are uniquely human and comes with an attitude and an aspiration to be that. And a human with a tool, especially if the tool is well prepared, is far more productive than a half-good engineer with a tool. That's kind of what we now devised. So that means that we've got very detailed full stack people that are, I mean, full stack as in from business into writing code daily, like I write code daily, but you don't want to put me in front of people all the time. I think Maddie and people trying to hide us often from people. So that means that you then have people who can translate what it is that needs to be done into proper prose, proper language. And that means that the tech person's job of the future is to create the scaffold, the discipline, the architecture, all of the formalisms, so that the patterns of various behaviors can be done by people that are not technical. And every company, a bit like Jeff was saying, will specialize in their field. So that means that the personality is going to be, I think, the big thing for the human, and the tech person is going to get more and more full stack. Because if you not understand the full stack, you're going to be in trouble. One of my daughters decided to specialize in applied math, AI, and genetics, right? So now the question is, you know, their first year AI assignment in the first semester is to write the self-drive car algorithm. And if I remember, there was no chance when I studied the stuff, that was even in my last year of my postgrad. And that's their first year assignment just to get into the program doing. So that means by the time they come out of it, when I looked at their future coding challenges they're going to be working in, you're going to have somebody that can truly be deep dive. So to compete with that, if you're a person who wants to do it, you know, be technical generically, it's going to be far tougher than the person that specializes. So the people who are going to specialize are going to specialize more deeply. And then you're going to have everybody around them are going to create a buffer of translating how the world works. And that's why we surrounded ourselves with amazing people that can interface with the world using language and style of how, and they all need to use tools in our business. Everybody use AI tools. Everybody have built a tiny app or a coding environment, even if you're completely non-technical. So it's like a style, I think, of business that we trying to adapt into.
Cool. Jeff, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess the one concern for me maybe is that specialization is not a good place to grow those specialists that you'll depend on. So those specialists exist today, but tomorrow, where are they going to come from? Because basically all of the work where these people would learn these skills is basically being done by a machine. So yeah, it's definitely a tension, because what you've described is absolutely the more productive path and very much idealized from that perspective. I don't think that it really answers the question of who's still going to be paying these salaries to people who are learning that craft that you'll depend on.
Thanks. Yash?
My view is that we're still very far away from kind of not having software engineers around, that some business person is going to be able to kind of sit behind the desk, dash out a few prompts, and then in an hour we'll have delivered a core banking program, for example. So yeah, I think that's still very far away, and kind of that's what kind of the statistics are bearing out as well. You know, if anyone's been through Deloitte's latest kind of paper on the percentage of people that actually have put out productionized working agentic AI flows and all the like, they're very meager statistics. So many are experimenting with them. It's under 15% that have it successful in production running, right? So it's pretty low. MIT, I know a few months ago released a little bit of a contentious paper where they said 95% of generative AI projects have been considered as failed. Now, maybe that's a bit more dramatic than it needed to have been, but they did pull out some very important things. And those all related to larger enterprises. Mom and pop shops, that software was always easy in the first place. So to automate that, that's going to be pretty simple. I think a lot of people that's careers revolve around that type of well understood software that we're not going to need a ton of people to do those. But there is still a need to innovate new technology solutions, things that don't yet exist, that won't be a consequence of going to a pool of harvesting what's already done. It needs to be new and novel. It needs to be created. It needs to be through a result of a reasoned process, not a probabilistic what token comes next process, right? So we're always going to need those. Whether the numbers, I can't kind of speak to that. We're all still kind of puzzling in this new world as it's changing. But we can certainly be sure that we need people to pioneer those things. It's a result of decades at times of very deep research. Maybe AI speeds it up in certain angles with regards to accidental complexity, but for essential complexity that's within the domain that you're working with, if you're doing some kind of very complex physics, or you're working with medical systems or military systems, there's a level of verification, certainty, and exploration that you need to do that I don't think today's AI engines are going to be able to do that. And I think that's where most of us, I include myself in the us, that's where it's going to go. It's going to free us up from drudgery type software, the stuff that we hate to do. And no one wants to do plumbing software, which is just calling between different layers to get information through to other layers. That we don't want to do. We never wanted to do that, right? We wanted to kind of free ourselves up to truly innovate and to figure out how do we use our craft to bring about new invention. So that's kind of where we go. I mean, to Aneen's question, in the short term, you're going to need to get both today still. And for the foreseeable future, I mean, next 5 years, I'm bold enough to say that because I know the glacial pace that corporates move at. So the amount of change that needs to happen for AI to truly unlock value in those places will require a lot of traditional things to get put right first. I will speed it up to an extent, but there's still a need for brains and eyeballs to go in and harmonize, rationalize, make decisions on how this is going to pan out and provide that assurance to other people in those organizations that'll say, yes, now we are actually going to put the stuff that we've written and committed to our customers, we're responsible for those things. We must understand those things that we actually push out into the world. You know, everybody else's stuff, that's their responsibilities. But when you're in a regulatory environment, there's stiff penalties or repercussions on life and death and financial loss. That requires a different level of attention that today is still only possible through brains and eyeballs of very credentialed, experienced people that have been burnt by different things.
Oh, you go. Sorry.
Thank you, guys. I think for now, we have to see if the ecosystem is going to be successful. Not ecosystem AI is successful, but the AI ecosystem that they've been putting billions and trillions of dollars into the infrastructure. We're still far from what we're talking. Regarding the vibe coding is a new normal, is future. But I believe next 5 to 10 years, we will still need creative software and computer engineers, especially in maths and stats, to be able to diversify different skills and bring more creative way to make it sustainable. So I don't think it's sustainable yet. We still need some time for that.
Can I
Please,
maybe disagree a little bit with some?
please, go ahead.
So did anybody listen to Jensen Huang's keynote Monday at the
Yes.
GTC?
I did listen to him, and even I put a post on my LinkedIn, something related to him. But at the end of the day, he's a businessman, and then he needs investment to pour money into what in his ecosystem, basically, to feed it.
That's with,
Yes.
he sits with $1 trillion worth of orders that he has to do.
Yes,
That means he doesn't need the investment. In actual fact, they got too much cash. That's why they're busy building a lot of stuff. But think about the construct for a moment. Go read their annual report from last year to this year. Then go read Google's report, Meta. Meta produce about 80% of their code, including anything that deals with client-facing stuff. NVIDIA's medical devices, all their safety-critical CPUs are all AI generated. It's too risky to put a human on top of it, is the mindset. So the question is, and this is a measure that you can do for yourself if you're in the space. How many million tokens do you burn per day on average? If you become generic in, I'm going to give you a bit of text and I'm going to do some coding and give you a bit of text and do some coding, you can't, that is not actually how Vibe engineering works. But we burn 20, 30 billion tokens a month, including the test cases that are built to make sure that there is no ways that a human could ever even remotely find the vulnerabilities that we have found in our code base, especially our new runtime engine and everything for scale. It found errors that we never noticed in 5 years in production. At scale, doing millions and millions of transactions per second, we haven't found it until it got unearthed by an AI tool. So I think that the mindset is shifting, and that's why we need to kind of rethink it. And that means mission critical system, medical systems. The only way to check every possible variation, every possible scenario, every possible use case you can't have an army of people big enough to test it for you, but now you can. You set up a test rig, you run it like we run test rigs, we run a Mac data center, right? So you scale up like 200 runtimes and you get them all to be pounded with transactions to see if you can find a memory leak while it runs. Like the one we tested recently was we took a core conversion from a Spark onto a GCP native deployment. You vibe coded the initial version, it broke. The client vibe coded it for 2, 3, 4 months, broke. We've got a self-healing process. 3 days later, everything is done. And you got the new scaffold of what the disciplines look like. So I think that whole practice of how you engineer, there's a mindset that we all have to kind of change into that has got nothing to do with the historical world of the agile or waterfall, whatever method you use. This is an entirely new style of work that I think is going to unearth a lot of people.
I just want to share something with you. I think yesterday I saw on Bloomberg, and there was an AI company. If I remember the name, I'm going to send it to you. The founder was saying if it was he started 2020 in normal day before this vibe coding and Gen AI, it will take 5 years for him to have a proper product. And then they just finished in 8 weeks. And then now they are getting 50 million USD in the first raising capital. So definitely saving time and then making a revolution. But I think still the gap and certain errors will be there for a while. That's what I believe. But anyhow, thank you, Jay.
I mean, that's why the Boris from Claude Code is interesting, because he built the first version of his product on his own. When he broke through the first 20 million users, he decided to get a team. They're now 3. Then he still codes it. And since November, they've done no coding with any humans. They sit over $1 billion in revenue, and it's one person with 4 non-technical people around him. So that means that if you've got a handful of tech people and you've got humans around you that can make sure that it works, that is the model, isn't it? That's emerging. We just don't know what it looks like. There's no practice. There's no book to go look at. There's no Scrum Master to go ask a question.
I think if the results of what you're describing is not consistently seen in the market, though.
No.
So there's reports from tool vendors, and those look glorious. There are results from academic institutions and consulting companies that kind of say the opposite. You've had Amazon that had 4 P1s within a couple of months of releasing their stuff, and they kind of clawed back a whole bunch of senior engineers that they had let go.
Yeah,
so we have a lot of stories like that.
Yes.
And I, you know, for my sins, I've been to a lot of different places, and there's not very many at an enterprise level that can attest to seeing that step change performance as a result of AI in their organizations. Do you think, Jay, that is a consequence of some type of internal reluctance to want to do it? Or do you think there's a level of complexity that still warrants the need for people to be involved, people to do software development in those places?
I don't really have an opinion on it, because all of our corporate clients have got enormous inertia. And the inertia in the meetings that we sit in is, have you made sure that that message has been approved? And I need to escalate it now to somebody, and we'll tell you about it 2 weeks from now. Makes up 90% of the time that we spend. To get our tech installed in a cluster is a couple of hours work. And to get it to generate what it needs to do is like, and that's why I think that the mindset, the complexity in the enterprise, if you're like a bank or a telco or a retailer or a gaming company, especially the companies we work with at scale, all of them sit with this challenge of, how do I get this machine to work? because I'm making money. I don't want to break the money machine. And then I'm scared in case I change something and it breaks something. And then you got corporate antibodies that then kick in, that everybody that stops everything from happening.
Yeah.
And that,
yeah, I told you so.
Exactly. And Matt was our teacher on that, because I've never worked for a corporate, right? I used to do a lot of work for McKinsey in the States, actually. We did a lot of work with telcos and other companies. We were like a specialist company, then they bring specialists in. And I just find that inertia is because of fear of risk. And I know that every single client, I was just in Mauritius actually for another bank, that even if you mentioned concepts in the space around how they can use it daily, for them to get even a Copilot approved. Copilot is Microsoft's ability to sell you something at a high price and use a cheap model in the background. That's why it doesn't work so well. But the thing is that people think that that's AI. So now when you see in person, they say, oh no, I use Copilot. I say, well, what part of it do you use? And they say, well, no, I've summarized my documents and it does that well. I'm sure. That's just a tool. That's not really going to be it's not going to make you that much more productive in the future. So I think there's maybe that concept of fear for me of how do I keep this enterprise running while these people are trying to bring in new things. And the piece that we replace in the bigger scheme of things is almost inconsequential to the humans that are there running around trying to get the basics to work. I'm not sure you see the same thing. And that's...
No, look, for me, the two are not mutually exclusive. There's a waning role of the developer with respect to simple things that can be automated. And all of us, we're already in that movie. I've got my own kind of AI-powered solution out there, and even myself kind of regularly involved in using AI. So it's not a kind of tussle between the two. It's about kind of how do we make it normal and what things are still to come, because I don't think we are there yet. It's still a probabilistic system that we're trying to kind of set up guardrails and context for to kind of give us deterministic outputs, which to me, there's something that still needs to be progressed. And I think that's kind of where us as expert engineers are involved in. You're going to need thousands of us to kind of work at these companies where we actually kind of progress the state of AI for better semantic handling and the like. Because right now, it's the biggest problem that we're having is that of assurance. And
that's why you're going to love, if you look at ecosystem code, you're going to love it. Because that's what it does. It creates a deterministic scaffold within which whatever you change is isolated in how it generates. It doesn't affect what works. And it's a full stack deployment. So there's a style that we've been working on. Anyway,
I can imagine I'd love to take a look at it to kind of see it. Most of my experiences with similar platforms have been using natural language programming constructs to kind of manage natural language programming constructs. So you're still using that probabilistic one and you're just doing another loop on it. There are still, if you take 10 systems and you're daisy chaining them together and in kind of making a business process call, and if you have 95% kind of accuracy and precision and they're getting it right, that 5% across all of them just increases the failure rate, and you do the maths and the stats, 95% across 10 systems now dropping. So now you're only hitting 60% accuracy. And that when we put it into systems where we're doing claims for clients or where we're doing other type of more important things is too high and gross a number to not have a human validation loop. I don't think it's forever because we're progressing to a pace where it's got to be better than what it is now. I think we're very excited with the results we're seeing now. I think 90% of people's excitement is based purely on the fact that they can have a conversation on a chat interface with an AI model. But when you go into more complex environments, the problems that we see there, they really go back to two problems I've seen over the last 2 decades. They haven't changed. These two problems have always been there. One is not recognizing what IT actually is, just the consumable. And the consequence of it is that enormous technical debt.
Yes.
It's enormous. You're trying to put an AI agent on top of it, but the rules are all messy, it's broken. They got different application owners in different parts of the organization, and just trying to kind of organize them in one place in itself is a near-death experience, actually, right? So getting a go live to work successfully, you kind of always have this question of why is it working as a prototype, but when we put it in production environments, it completely falls over. It's because we design these things in sandboxes. When we go into an organization, we find a sandbox for ourselves, we isolate ourselves from the change happening outside of it.
Yes.
We can control the data, we can control the interfaces, but when we put it into production, the gloves come off, and now there's nothing to shield ourselves against all of that unfiltered variety hitting us all at once.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to kind of how AI helps us better manage dependencies, terrible systems that are undocumented, and how we actually kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, no, we got a deep interest in that. Maybe I don't want to talk about it too much, but there's this.
I know Mauriz's
Yeah.
feet are tapping like this, and it's just getting harder. Mauritz, I know you've had your hand up forever. How are you doing, Mauritz?
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating discussion. I actually, spent too much time watching all kinds of AI content. And yesterday I discovered that it was Andre Karpathy, how do you pronounce his surname, who termed vibe code about a year ago. And it's incredible how much traction the term has gained just in 12 months. Here we are with the whole dedicated chat about it. Anyway, I don't mean to digress. As Jay knows, we've taken the leap to propose to a client enterprise project using then this sort of, well, as Jay said, the deterministic scaffolding model, which we call human-directed AI-enabled development. But as an AI evangelist, I often encounter skeptics, and they love trying to disprove me. And one sent me a report, Jay, by Alibaba, who tested the ability, because it's one thing to vibe code something, then test it and say, yeah, it works. But another thing in an enterprise environment over the long term to maintain that thing and caution, mitigate regression and the like. And the report sort of implies that many 75% projects don't make it. My question, Jay, is, do you think, or are you confident that by following this deterministic scaffolding approach with a human-directed AI-enabled development, we can be confident that we'd be able to give the client a code base they'd be able to maintain after it's been handed over?
Well, let's go back to that report, right? What Alibaba published was if you generate from scratch continuously using various approaches, right? So that is what people think you need to maybe do. But if you apply product line practice, so it's commonality versus variability, the more common something is and the slower it's going to change, the more discipline you need to have around its longevity. And that means that the more strict you are around its implementation. Okay, so that means that if it's security, database access, vulnerabilities around the connectivity, the API layer, everything that deals with the business rules that are in the core of the core platform should be deterministic. And that's what happens. So even if you take our MCP and you plug it into your ecosystem code and you ask it to generate you the core scaffold, you can get Claude Code to perform at least 90 times better than what it does if you're just trying to do it from scratch. Then what happens then is that if you then have a place where things change often, like let's say you want to build a new front end that's going to perform certain actions. We all know in good design, you don't put business rules in a UI. How many systems have you seen where that's done? Hundreds. So how do you force it? How do you force the human not to do it? Because the human keep on breaking the rules around naming conventions. They short circuit things. They do a quick fix. They just add bits and pieces. So if you do a new from the commonality and you work your way up the stack, we've got an architecture that we internally, that is a 5-layer system that we use, similar to Claude. Listen, I spent too much time maybe with the guys from Claude, so that's why I've got this a similar view, but for deterministic rather than for generative approaches. And at the level 4 and 5, how the agent works is that if it breaks a UI, and just that one form breaks, you want to have the assurance that nothing in your data gets broken, and nothing in the business rules get broken. And that is, I think, what people don't spend time on preparing for. And that's what we work on. So what is the thing that evolves in a system more frequently than something else is the question. So and if you think about core database designs, if I think of like our banking clients, I mean, they got COBOL systems with 4,000 tables. Why are there 4,000 tables? Because a core banking ontology probably need about 20. The reason why they're 4,000, because every new generation of developer that makes a change adds a new developer to keep on adding pieces to it. And then they write some custom system on top of it. And that has been the crisis in the software world. Maybe I've been in software engineering for too long. Is that whole construct of patching and fixing as quickly as possible breaking, we can fix that. And that's why if you build a new system that can evolve, that is designed to evolve, it's got an entirely different characteristic because your discipline is exponentially better than what it was if you had to do it entirely by hand. So that's kind of the view. So I think that the evolution at each layer is very, very different. So even if you regenerate your entire stack and you know that it came off a model-driven design approach so that the scaffold looks the same, it means that you could regenerate your app even after you're making changes to it. But that means that you cannot take classical Vibe the way that Andre named it. Remember, he changed his mind. He talks about Vibe engineering now. Remember, he's not a programmer that programs systems for enterprises. He's a programmer that builds tools and creates training and consulting that doesn't build full deployed systems. So I think that the thinking in the market is creating noise for people. And the same with that, like that MIT report. That MIT report doesn't say that those projects failed. Yash, I don't know if you read it in detail. Yeah. What they say is that they did not deliver economic value as expected. Not even that they did not deliver economic value. They say, as expected. I spoke to clients who were expecting to replace 1,000 people in the call center, and they can only do 500, so the project's considered failed. So what we must be careful of is that these reports are published, and when you read the research behind it, you'll see that.
Yeah, no, I have gone into detail to the MIT report. It was a bit controversial, but
Yeah. I'm cognizant of time, guys. Jeff, you had your hand up. You
Yes,
still-
I can close out my view with what I have seen using Claude specifically is an extremely effective use of Claude skills. So in other words, when we have a very well understood model and when we have excellent examples for these tools to work against, they are extremely effective. They can deliver several days worth of work in minutes, which is phenomenal. So like, for example, when I was talking about building an emulator, it's very easy to do. It can look at the existing endpoints, it can just code them out, and it's a very simple pattern of what it needs to return. Claude skills, if you have a specific application framework, each skill informs Claude how it's supposed to use it. And obviously using multiple different layers, it can focus in on each one of these skills at a time and use that effectively. I think where it falls apart though is understanding the system as a whole. So that is a scale problem that I'm not sure what exactly it would take for an AI to understand it, but I think at this stage, it's still very clear that a human understands much more context than an AI does. I'm not sure. I guess that is all dependent on the constraints on these models. I think I am, at the moment, I don't want to fall into the trap of AI can never do it, but there is a certain level of scale to context from a human understanding. Why does a business operate? I mean, it's not just to make sprockets and widgets. People working there, they have families to raise, they have other things that they do. Ultimately, why do you go to work? It's not to work, it's to live. Well, hopefully. So I think an AI doesn't have any of that understanding. And I think Yash earlier was talking about innovation as well. Where are the new ideas going to come from? And I think when we consider that, when you've got a well-understood problem context, it's well-contained, you've got a solid foundation that you can build upon, I think this is exactly the kind of place where these tools will shine. And yeah, I think the risk is that it's going to drown out, I suppose, the other important facet that is the real people behind that busy innovating. Just at my personal view in terms of dangers, I suppose.
Thanks, Jeff. We've actually have run out of time, and I know Ecosystem run a whole new webinar after this, but Grant has got his hand up. Can I take Grant's question and then I'll wrap up?
Go for it.
Or
No rush.
question or statement. How's it, Grant? Over to you, Grant.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm actually on my phone at the moment, so the controls are a bit different. I'm actually a chartered accountant, so I know nothing about programming. But I've been running a company. We deploy very experienced chartered accountants into SMEs and large corporates. And just like you guys are mentioning today, there's a lot of talk about what's the future of CFOs in companies. And my take on it is that AI can come up with a lot of great strategy, come up with a lot of great points, but at the end of the day, it still takes execution to get things done. Execution always comes down to human interaction. If you can't sell and market and influence people, you're not going to get any execution done. And I cannot see AI ever getting that right.
No, embodiment it's called. Because so that means that the embodiment. So the question is that, can you build a future company with no humans? No, you can't. Can you build it with a fraction of what you had before? Yes, you can. And that's kind of the debate, Grant, I think, that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And Grant has just told me I've got a job for life being a sales guy. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think it's not about the model, it's
Damn
about
right.
the approach. So Grant, is as you invent new ways of commercializing what you commercialize and you use AI tools, and that's the one thing I saw in San Francisco, is that the biggest thing that scares OpenAI is not Anthropic's invention style. It's their way of work. What scares Google about Anthropic is not the tech, it's how they work. So there's a new way of competition that is the core of how you do it and what approach you follow that that we are going through almost what happened with the earliest days of building systems, where we wanted to have formalisms and then we wanted to make it flexible. And now, how do you do it? And if you invent an approach that works for you and you can get your team to believe it and work on it, and somebody can't get their mind around it, you're highly likely to outcompete them. And that's the thinking, at least that we were exposed to.
I'm going to wrap up. It's been a brilliant conversation. Jeff, Jay, Yash, thank you so much for the insights. I have a beautiful script, tore that up. I think we definitely need to do a take two, because I love what Grant came in and spoke about. I think the audience interaction was brilliant. I think we definitely need to do part 2 of this. Madison, if you want to make my next session part 2 of this, I think it would be great. We'll get some more guests on and get the current guests on and carry this conversation. So thanks for everyone for joining. Please join the techie session after this with the ecosystem, and we'll see you soon. Have an awesome week.